Migration. When we think of the term, many of us think of birds. They're very visible and we can see them passing overhead, right above us, even if you live in the city. In the north, every autumn millions of waterfowl, such as these geese, take to the air and head south. It is said that they do this to escape the cold, but the truth is they're following the resources, good growing conditions, and access to food. It happens on a regular basis because every year summer transforms into winter, and then winter transforms once again into summer. And by taking to the sky and traveling thousands of miles, they can minimize competition with those organisms that cannot migrate, and also gain access to the rich foods of the south during the winter and the rich foods of the north during the summer. This increases the species' likelihood of survival. Thus, migration is an important and successful evolutionary strategy, though it perhaps creates some confusion. The geese at my farm certainly were wondering what the heck this wild goose was doing when it dropped by the barn to hang out for a few days, share their grain, and comfortable shelter. The geese seemed to know that was somehow related, but also different. For one thing, where the domestic geese were never going to leave, this goose soon moved on, and without so much as a thank you, if you can believe it. Though of course birds are not the only creatures that migrate, nor follow the seasons. Many insects do, such as this monarch butterfly. They are social creatures and often roost together, gathering into groups called flutters. How perfect is that? And traveling together in flocks of millions. Many whales also make massive migrations, following changes in seasons and currents and food availability, the fundamental drivers of most any migration. And those who have been on the sea in time to see them pass have been privileged to witness an awe-inspiring sight. But whether you see them on land or at sea, the sight of animals in motion is always a beautiful thing. Even as this autumn, it's to bid the waterfowl adieu. Migration, though, is such an amazingly successful strategy that you might be surprised at some of the organisms that follow it. There up ahead, you are seeing thousands of those organisms. Yes, the trees. Trees migrate. And when you think about it, I think that is a fact that is mind-boggling. I mean, how could these organisms migrate? They don't have legs, they don't have wings, they don't have fins. And unless we are living in Tolkien's world where Ents gather great herds of trees, they don't present any sign of being mobile at all. But, very likely since the dawn of their existence, they have always migrated. Though trees, with their fantastically long lives, do not follow the seasons, they follow the ages. And unlike animals, they do not move as individuals. Rather, they scatter their succeeding generations into the wind. A process so slow, it is invisible across the expanse of a single human life. The first trees appeared upon this earth somewhere between 350 and 420 million years ago. Taller than their plant competition, their towering trunks made for strong structures, and they were able to compete against lesser plants vying for sunlight. It was then, call it 400 million years ago, that these very successful new organisms began their voyages. The initial species of trees began their long march around the world. However, this wasn't yet migration, this was really more colonization, the process of a successful species simply expanding its range. And in this expansion, trees benefited the world, for they are by their very nature beneficial, creating oxygen, sequestering carbon, and cooling the landscape, along with sharing an immense amount of nutrients with other organisms, such as the microscopic fauna and flora that live in the rhizosphere, the soil around the tree's roots, as well as the larger plants and animals that live upon the surface. But over time, as trees migrated, climate changed, pathogens evolved, and animal species came into being, capable of preying upon and destroying trees. Each evolved to live in its own climatological zone, and these became the compelling forces behind the initial tree migrations. If a locale became unsuitable for the species to survive, they had to go elsewhere. But how? How does a tree rooted immutably in the earth manage to migrate? And trees are huge, so how is it that we cannot see this? The answer lies in the fact that trees, with their extensive lifespans, live in something closer to deep time. A concept humans, with their relatively shorter lifespans, have a hard time wrapping our minds around. Trees often have lifespans of centuries to millennia. so that to humans they can seem static, their lives as unchanging as mountains. But in deep time, even mountains change. And the way trees change their range is through the glacially slow process of casting their future generations as far off as they can. Here, we see mature trees, not old, but tall and growing into maturity. But in their shadows down below, there are countless saplings, the products of tens of thousands of seeds that these trees have literally cast into the winds across the long decades and centuries of their lives. But when trees drop their seeds, they don't always fall at their feet, so to speak, at their roots. Many seeds are eaten by animals, to be released later on in the form of scat, or one animal or another's forgotten food cache, dozens of meters or even potentially kilometers away if a seed was eaten by a migrating bird. Other trees, such as maples, release their single-winged seeds into the wind. By and large, these fall within a few meters of the parent tree, but now and then, a gust of wind blows by, and if conditions are just right, those winged seeds that spin like lone helicopter blades toward the ground can be carried into the air and drift for hundreds, maybe even thousands of meters. And across a span of centuries, new trees grow and release their seeds, and they too might be lucky enough to have a small percentage of their seeds also travel far from the parent tree. The tree may be over a stream or a brook and drop some seeds which float for potentially hundreds of meters to many, many kilometers down that waterway. Some trees even grow by the sea, and their dispersal strategy is to cast their seeds into the sea and let them flow to wherever they will. But whether by water, air, or animal, whatever the means of dispersal is, whenever new seeds travel, whether a few meters or a few hundred kilometers from the parent tree, if they fall where conditions are good, that seed may germinate, and if it is very lucky, survive to adulthood, reproduce, and spread its seeds even further. And as long as some of those seeds continue to move in a direction conducive to that species' survival, its seeds will germinate and flourish, and the species will grow more numerous in that area. And in time, entire forests formed of that species of tree, or at least a mix of that species of tree, will come to predominate. In this way, across the ice ages, Europe has experienced the march of deciduous forests, back and forth across the Alps. North America has seen its coniferous forests expand northward and then retreat southward, as ice ages have come and gone. Indeed, this movement of trees across the ranges is a tale that has played out in every continent on the face of the earth, even, very likely, Antarctica, long before glaciers overran that continent. And as the trees have migrated, they have taken the species that dwell among them with them. Their slow and patient progress across the long ages gives animals, whether birds or mammals, insects or microscopic flora and fauna, time to adjust to their changes and develop homes in the niches that the trees carve out for them. Thus, trees migrate across the ages by moving multi-generationally, casting their seeds every which way, and those seeds that land in a direction of favorable conditions come to flourish that way. As climates warm, southern forests will move north, and as climates cool, northern forests will move south. In ages where drier conditions come to predominate, trees adapted to such conditions will expand their terrain. And in wetter, rainier epochs, moisture-loving trees will move into new areas and come to predominate. Thus, across time, we see the movement of species of trees north and south, and east and west. Though it is barely noticeable to a human, if we look across deep time, we see that trees are in a perpetual process of migration. Tragically, this cycle, which has carried on for hundreds of millions of years, has been thrown into chaos by man's activities. Development of vast tracts of land, clear-cutting so much of the world's forests, and human-induced climate change are creating a modern world where change is happening faster than trees can cope, and the long-established methods of migration are no longer sufficient. Sadly, unless a change is made and the natural balance restored, we will not only lose tree species, but many of the flora, fauna, and fungi that depend upon them. Thank you for coming along on this voyage of discovery into the understory. The purpose of the Understory channel is to tell the tales of the lives and the science that shape the natural world. If you appreciate the work of the channel, please take a moment to like and subscribe. And feel free to hop on over to Facebook and join the Understory group, where you can find links to fascinating articles and take part in discussions relevant to natural science. And finally, thanks to the many contributors who make this channel possible.